Hello everyone, my name is Roya, and I've already read 9 books in the first half of August, and it's actually not even a week into August right now, so this is kind of insane. But anyway, I just wanted to let you guys know also that I am doing a giveaway on Twitter and on Instagram right now for my book, Unicorn Hunting. So if you would like to win yourself a copy, you can hop on over there, and one of the bonus entries is actually to be subscribed to this channel. So if you're already subscribed to this channel, all you have to do is send me a screenshot to that tweet and also retweet the tweet, and then you've got 2 entries right there to win. So first, at the very end of July, I actually read Throne of the Crescent Moon by Saladin Ahmed, and this is a Middle Eastern inspired fantasy story, and I really hoped that I would like this book a lot more than I did, because I was really looking forward to reading it, and ultimately it was kind of a letdown. I mean, it was still good, the world building was still pretty good, but basically the characters came across as very one-track minded, and not quite one-dimensional, but kind of in that direction, and this book was, it's still worth a read, I think, but I do think that it is not particularly character-driven or plot-driven, so I was just expecting a lot more plot, and I was expecting to like this book a lot more. First read for the booktubeathon was Seafire by Natalie C. Parker, and this is about some female pirates on a pirate ship in a Mad Max-esque world / water world-esque world, basically. And so while this book was really badass and it had lots of badass ladies and it was very unique and interesting, I did feel like I wanted more out of this setting, because we don't get very many place names, we don't get any country names at all, so I don't know where this takes place, if it's a fantasy world or if it's just a post-apocalyptic version of this world, that sort of thing. So that's where it fell flat for me. Because I did really like this book, but I did think that in particular was an issue for me, and the fact that there is technology in this world, but it is mentioned so like few and far between that I kept forgetting it existed. So there are motors, there are batteries, there are remotes you can press to make something explode, etc., etc. That all exists in this world, but I kept forgetting that it had technology in it. Because mentions of it were just so seldom. So I felt like the setting, I just wanted more out of it, and that's why it kind of fell flat for me, but I did really like this book. Next, I read Sadie by Courtney Summers, and this is about a girl who basically raised her little sister when their mom left, and then the little sister turns up murdered. So this ended up being such a good read. It basically has this whole theme of girls go missing all the time, and a lot of people, the people who should be doing something about it kind of just don't, because I don't know, it's just not as pressing of an issue to them, and all of that stuff. So Sadie kind of takes it into her own hands to avenge her sister, and because she knows who did it. And it's told in the form of a podcast. So every other chapter or so is Sadie's point of view, and then every other chapter or so is the podcast. And what I thought was kind of interesting was that at first the podcast seems to be interviewing people that Sadie talked to a good while ago, like several chapters ago, and as the story progresses, it gets closer and closer to where she actually is. So it's very interesting that it was kind of catching up to her the whole time, but yeah, it's a very good book. I loved it. Highly worth the read. What goes up must come down. The next book that I read is The Scorpion Rules by Erin Bow, and this had a very cool premise about basically all of the different kingdoms have to turn in their first child as a hostage, so that if they go to war with each other, that hostage gets killed, so it keeps the peace. And obviously, and this had a good theme going through it about, obviously, we know that a forced peace is not peace at all. So in that sense, it was very, it did have a lot of potential. But however, certain things about this setting just made no sense, and this is actually either a far distant future of our world or an alternate reality. So these different nations who have to turn in a hostage are like Canada, Ireland, whatever. But most of our main characters, including the main character, we never actually are told what country they're actually from. So the main character, it's implied that she's from Scotland or Ireland, but there's nothing that actually says. And so there are just a lot of things about this world that made no sense because nothing is explained. And so, for instance, we get a definition of some kind of advanced technology that they have, but we never understand in context what that is. So there's like randomly a mention of there were no eye icons where her eyes were on the screen. And I kind of thought, what the heck are eye icons? Like, that's never defined. So stuff like that kept happening throughout it. And so the whole thing just didn't make any sense to me because we were never explained anything in this book. And so there is also a mention at one point of Mississippi going to war with somebody, and so that implies that the different states are independent nations, but then it's also implied throughout the story that they are not. So we kind of, it makes no sense that that was mentioned when, why would Mississippi go to war with somebody by itself if it's part of a larger nation? It doesn't make any sense. And then also what two countries go to war with each other over is only briefly mentioned as well, and it says something about Lake Erie turning out like Lake Ontario, and we never figure out what it is that happened to Lake Ontario. It's never mentioned again. It's only mentioned one time. And then it's not explained why Scotland or Ireland would go to war with somebody over Lake Erie or Lake Ontario. It doesn't make any sense. So basically, we just got no explanation for anything that happened to this book, and I don't understand. But overall, it had so many good ideas, and it had a lot of potential, and actually the main character is bi, and she is in love with both a dude and a girl, and she basically ends up with the girl, and that part of the story is beautiful, but I just did not like this book at all because just the whole thing is a complete mess. The next book I read was really good, and that was A Touch of Gold by Annie Sullivan. This was sent to me by a book publicist in exchange for an honest review, and I absolutely adored this book. This is every bit the piratey adventure that I wanted. This is a retelling of the story of King Midas, who, you know, he wanted to be able to touch things and have them turn to gold, but then it turned out that everything he touches turns to gold, so he touches his daughter and she turns to a gold statue, and he goes, oh no, undo it, undo the magic, oh no. And so he basically has to wash all the gold things in the river to have them turn back to normal, but he washes his daughter in the river, she turns back to normal, but he forgets about the other stuff because he's like, oh no, my daughter. And so then she actually turns back into gold, only she's alive. So she's just a girl with like completely gold skin and hair and everything. And he has to stay with the gold objects, and he can only be away from them for like a certain amount of time, or else he gets very sick and could die. So one day, these golden objects get stolen. So he gets very sick and is on the brink of death, and the daughter has to go and find the gold objects because she's the only one who can tell how close or far away they are, because technically she is one of the gold objects. And she goes on this like seafaring piratey adventure to get them back. And it is such an incredible book. I loved it. It just came out on August 14th, and I should have posted a full review up of it on that day. So if I did, you can go and check it out on my channel for further thoughts. Then I read The White Queen by Philippa Gregory. This follows Elizabeth Woodville, who married King Edward, whatever, before the Tudor era, basically. And so I basically grew up reading her books. I haven't read one in a long time, but in high school, this is basically the type of thing I was reading, like, all the time. So this was a really good story. It was very interesting. Elizabeth is a very interesting character in that she basically becomes queen because, like, she was in love and everything. Like, really, the king shouldn't have married her. But she spends her entire reign just defending her throne the entire time because the Yorks and the Lancasters are fighting over the throne of England. And what's also very interesting is that she is actually a pagan character, and Philippa Gregory's representation of paganism is never amazing or anything. Some of the magical stuff that happens tends to be somewhat out of place for the rest of the story because most of the magical stuff that goes on is very true to kind of, we're just doing a ritual with some water and herbs and stuff, and it's like normal things. and then if someone puts a curse on somebody and then it happens in this way that seems like very out of place in the story. So that was kind of my issue with it, which I have experienced in other Philippa Gregory books as well. But overall, I really liked this book. I think it might actually be one of my favorites of her books. The next thing I read was an audiobook, and that was Binti Home by Nnedi Okorafor. This is the second book in the Binti series, and it follows Binti as she goes home from university for the first time, and she's, you know, not only has she changed because she's experienced some different things than what's going on in her home planet, but she also you know, she's had a run-in with aliens in the first book. She has tentacly things instead of hair, all of that, and the aliens that she had run into and befriended and all of that are the enemies of the humans, and so of course everyone, all her family members are like, why, Binti, why? And she's like, dude, I did what I did, I discovered what I discovered, like, too bad. So this was a very interesting book. I thought that I liked it a little bit, a tiny bit better than the first one, but they were very close. They're both very good books. We get kind of a different setting in this one because we do get to see a lot more of where Binti grew up and what her home life is like and all of that, because in the first book we kind of just see her going to university and all of that stuff. But definitely if you like sci-fi and you haven't read that book, like, you should totally read it. Next, I read Gwenfire by Mercedes Lackey, and I absolutely adored the crap out of this book. This is a Guinevere, an Arthurian retelling following Guinevere and, or Gwenfire, as she is sometimes called, and I think this is my favorite version of Gwenfire because in most Arthurian retellings, there are so many badass ladies that Guinevere kind of takes a backseat to it because she's kind of just some chick and she's just kind of there. And I thought this was such a good book because in this she is a warrior and a princess. She has a sister who is like really close in age to her but younger, and she you know from the beginning is going to be not a very good person. It's such a good book. I think this might actually be my favorite Mercedes Lackey book. And lastly, The Girl King by Mimi Yu. This follows two sisters named Lu and Min, and basically they are princesses and their father decides to pass the throne to their cousin instead, and Lu has to marry him, but she like basically gets framed for something and runs away, and there's just a whole bunch of secrets and political intrigue and all kinds of stuff. The world building and the history of this world is like on par with adult fantasy. It's so good. So I definitely recommend this book as well. So those are the books that I read in the first half, or the first week even, of August. I don't think that the second half of August is going to have quite that many. But I don't know how that happened. I think it's mostly because of the booktubeathon. But anyway, let me know if you've read any of these, have thoughts on them, etc., etc. Let me know what your favorite book you've read so far this month is, and I will see you very soon with a new video. Bye!